Thus far in this series, we have been looking at ancient history of Tamilagam, Sangam. We have been looking at the history of the Cholas, we have looked at trade. Now, let us look at some contemporary history, and let us take up a topic which is always in the news, Poes Gardens. Whenever we think of Poes Gardens, we get only one name in our memory, and that is of J. Jayalalitha, the former Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. Certainly from the 1980s, the very phrase Poes Gardens has been synonymous with Tamil Nadu's politics. But was there a history to Poes Gardens before the arrival of J. Jayalalitha in that locality? Certainly there was, and that history goes back by 250 years prior to that. Let us see what that history is all about. The English came to Madras in 1639, and 1 year later they built Fort St. George. And then for the next 150 years or so, they hardly stirred out of the fort. Their houses were inside it, their offices were inside it, the warehouses were there. There was a lot of insecurity about moving out into the city. That is because the British were quite afraid of the French, the Golconda forces, and then finally in the 1780s they were terrified by Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. It is only in 1799, when Tipu Sultan was killed in the 4th Anglo-Mysore War, that the British became brave enough to come out of Fort St. George and build houses in other parts of the city. And one of the places that they were very fond of building houses was the village of Tenampet. There was a reason for that. Today when you come down Mount Road and Tenampet, from Fort St. George when you come down Mount Road and Tenampet is on your left hand side, on the right you have the locality of Tinagar. In the 19th century there was no Tinagar. This was a huge lake of 77 acres known as the Long Tank of Mylapore. So in the evenings there was a lot of breeze coming from the water, and this became a preferred residential area. And the British began to build huge garden houses over here. These garden houses were of dimensions that we can only imagine today. On an average, each property had 30 acres and 40 acres and things like that, and there were no roads leading to those houses. So roads had to be laid. When the roads were laid, they were named after the people who lived in the main house at the end of the road. So for example, you have Mowbray's Road, which is today TTK Road. Mowbray's Road begins in Royapeta and goes all the way up to Adyar, where it ends in the Madras Club property. That in the 1780s was the house of George Mowbray, and you can imagine that there was nothing between Royapeta and that house. So the road leading from this end to that one was called Mowbray's Road. Similarly, in the 1800s, when an East India Company merchant or an officer, we have no idea, his name is given variously as Poe, P-O-E, Poes, P-O-I-S, and Pugh, P-U-G-H. He bought a large chunk of land off Tenampet, and that became Poes Garden, P-O-E'(S) Garden. Over a period of time, the apostrophe vanished and the place became Poes Gardens. The entrance to Poes Gardens was not from Cathedral Road, it was from Mount Road, and even today there is a Poes Road leading to nowhere. It starts from Mount Road and stops abruptly somewhere near where Poes Gardens is today. That was the old entrance. When did this entrance from Cathedral Road come? Let us look at that. So as the British began moving out of Fort St. George, very few of them wanted to go on Sunday mornings back to the fort to attend the service in the church of St. Mary's. The bishop therefore became very worried and decided that if the English were not coming to the church will have to move. And so the decision was taken to build a cathedral off Mount Road. And in 1815, work began on St. George's Cathedral, and the road that led to it from Mount Road became Cathedral Road. The bishop moved into Poes Gardens, and a small pathway was built to connect the house to Cathedral Road. And that is how it remained for 100 years or so. In 1921, the directors of Binis and Company began looking for a suitable place where they could build houses for their senior officers and directors. Earlier, they had all lived in rented accommodation on Nungambakam High Road, and the managing director was living in what is today Good Shepherd's Convent. At that time it was called Eccleston, and it was a massive house. In 1921, the then managing director Kenneth K was killed by snake bite in that house, and thereafter the directors decided that they did not want to have anyone residing there. They decided to buy Poes Gardens, and there in the middle there was a huge old bungalow by name Waterton. Surrounding that bungalow they built 4 other houses, to which they gave the names Greystoke, Hallsborough, Thornton and Westbourne. These were the 4 houses that they built. And so 5 senior directors came to live in that area, the senior most living in Waterton, which was the main bungalow. Between 1921 and 1959, this is where the Binis senior management lived, and therefore the road leading from Cathedral Road to Poes Gardens became Binis Road, a name that survives even today. There is incidentally another Binis Road in the city, and that is the road that leads to Connemara Hotel. That is because the founder of Binney and Company, John Binney, in the early years of the 19th century lived where the Connemara Hotel is today, and therefore that road became Binis Road as well. The city therefore has 2 Binis Roads. In 1959, the directors of Binney decided that they did not want to live in Poes Gardens any longer, and they decided to shift to the side of the river Adyar, and there they began developing what we today know as Boat Club Road. Several bungalows were built there for their senior directors. Thereafter, Poes Gardens was sold, and you can look at the way land was valued at that time. In 1921, Poes Gardens was purchased by Binney for 2.5 lakhs. In 1959, they sold it for 3.5 lakhs. Land had appreciated just by 1 lakh in a period of almost 30 years. That then was commercial value for you. Thereafter, Poes Gardens was developed with plots being laid, and many people began to build their houses on it. Many well-to-do people, many industrialists, and Selvi J. Jayalalitha, who was then one of the top-ranking film stars of the Tamil world, she too moved in over there. Many years later, Mr. Rajnikant would move in as well into that area. Poes Gardens till today remains one of the most desired residential areas of the city. Thank you very much for listening in, and we will look at other interesting episodes of this kind in the next programs. Thank you.